All right, so let's get into the card that we are gonna make today. So today we are working with some of Spellbinder's new release, and that is the North Pole Friends, which are these guys right here, and the North Pole Sentiment, which is that right there. We're also going to be using a die for the snowdrifts, and we are gonna work on some techniques on how to create that galaxy Aurora borealis. I know I'm saying that wrong, but you know what I mean, those northern lights in the sky. In order to make our Aurora borealis northern lights background scene, we're going to need some watercolor paper. You can use whatever watercolor cardstock you want to use, but I'm going to be using the Tim Holtz Distressed watercolor cardstock, and this is a heavyweight paper. We are going to put a lot of water on this paper, so you want something that's going to stand up to it. So I'm just going to open this up. Now you can do this two different ways. You can work with one large sheet of cardstock, make your backgrounds and then cut them up, or you can cut them up first and then make your backgrounds. Either way, I recommend that you do lots of these backgrounds at once so that you've got a nice supply to have ready when you're ready to make cards. All right, for this particular example, I'm actually gonna cut my cardstock into fours, making 4 A2 size bases. So we're just gonna cut this down, and I'm gonna cut it down at 5.5 the long way, and then I'm gonna turn it on its side, and I'm going to cut it down to 4.25. So now I will have 4 different panels that I'm going to be making, and we need some distress ink to work with, and you just need 2 colors to do this. So you need a pink color and a kind of a blue or greenish blue color, and when you put these 2 colors together, they're going to make purple. So you're gonna get 3 different colors in your sky. I'm gonna be working with my DIY splat box, if you will, and as you can see, this is very loved. Let's get out our first panel, and we're going to put it inside our splatter box. I'm going to be using the Spellbinder's Mighty Mister, and I'm going to really get this paper wet. Now there's 2 sides to this paper. There's the smooth side, and then there's the rough side. I'm going to be putting all of my ink and my water on the rough side. So just get your water ready and start spritzing. Okay, it's nice and saturated, and I am going to go in with my peacock feathers, and I'm just going to spray some of that around, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to be spraying some of my picked raspberry, and as you can see, when those 2 colors meet, that is where the purple starts to form. I'm just going to lift it up and kind of make it move a little bit. All right, that's looking really good. Now make sure that you've got something handy to wipe your hands with. Now I'm going to take a heat gun to this and try to dry some of this off. My paper is bowing up, so I just want to poke it down with a little poker tool so that I can get some of that color in the center, because right now it's all kind of falling to the edges where it's bending. Now you don't have to get it completely dry, but we just want to speed that process up. And now I can move that around just a little bit. Some of that dry paper is going to set in with that color. Now I'm going to let this dry on its own for a little bit. Let's work on the next panel. All right, on this one, I want to see what I can do with stripes, kind of make it linear in the way that the colors are mixing together. So I'm just going to do, oops, I forgot to do my water. All right, so I'm just going to do stripes, and then in between, I'm going to do my pink raspberry, or picked raspberry. We have some nice vivid colors here, and I love how the pink and the greens are all sort of mixing together to make that nice pretty purple color. Let's go ahead and let that dry. All right, this technique, let's try doing it without the water first. We're gonna place the ink down first, and then we're gonna apply the water. What this is going to allow to do is that the color is gonna seep into the cardstock first before it starts to blend together, and that's gonna give us a slightly different look. All right, now that we have all of that ink down, let's go ahead and spray it with some water. And I'm just gonna let it sit there for a little bit, just let that color soak in. Go ahead and move some of that water around. And I like having a paper towel down in my splatter box, so if I get a lot of excess ink, I can just kind of dip it off into our splatter box here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and try to dry this now. Let's go ahead and put that to the side to dry. Now this next technique is we're going to be using our glass board studio. You can use any kind of non-porous type surface. I'm gonna go ahead and get our cardstock wet, and I'm gonna go ahead and start spraying in our color. Now the reason why I'm doing it this way is because I want some of that ink that's going to land on the glass mat that we can reuse. Now this is pretty dry, not completely, but pretty dry. All right, so we've got some really pretty color on the paper, on the glass mat. So I'm just going to kind of do some dipping here. Smooshing, I guess, is the appropriate technique or term. We're just building up some layers that way. Okay, gonna use the glue gun or the heat tool to heat it again. All right, let's let that dry naturally. Now this was the first one that we did, and where we used a lot of water down, then we put all of the colors in just random areas. We didn't do anything special. It's a little light than I like it, so I'm going to add some more color to it. Let's pull out our splatter box. And let's just add just a little water. We're not gonna completely soak it because I don't want to dilute all of the color that's there. So I'm just going to give it just a couple of spritzes, light mists, and I'm going to be a little bit more careful about where I'm spraying and trying not to get too much. I'm gonna get some more water here and kind of mix those colors in. That is looking really good. Go ahead and blow dry that. Actually, I want to blow dry it on my glass mat because that paper towel is wet, and the glass will actually reflect the heat a little bit better and dry it from the bottom. Now you can use a heat gun like you would use for an embossing tool, but just make sure that you're not holding it in one area for too long. Because of that nozzle, the heat is not dispersed over a bigger area. I do like the heated craft tool from Ranger to do this, but you know, you could use a hair dryer on a low setting so things don't go flying off your workspace. Okay, that is looking really good. And I think we might be done with this. I do want it to dry, and I'm probably gonna let it dry for a few hours. Before we come back in, we're gonna be using some of our Uncharted Mariner to kind of give that silhouette or vignette look. But let's go ahead and put that up to dry. All right, here's the second one we did, and we did more of a straight line, if you will, to kind of mimic the way the northern lights sort of shoot up in the air. A couple things that I don't really like about this right now is that there's a lot of white space right here. So since this is green over here, I'm gonna wet this area, and then I'm gonna put a little bit of our red, our picked raspberry, and see if I can make that a little bit purple. And that is looking really good. Let's go over here and make that a little green. All right, and then just dry it out. That is looking really good. So just gonna have that dry for a bit as well, probably leave it for a couple of hours. This is the one that we sprayed on the glass mat, and then we kind of smushed it. So we've got some ink still here, and I'm going to take advantage of this. First of all, let's go ahead and spritz our paper, and I'm gonna spritz the ink a little bit. And then I'm just going to go in here and just add some of this ink to the card, giving it a little bit of extra dimension and layer of color. There we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe this up and then dry that off. All right, that is pretty much dry. I'm just gonna leave that to dry a couple hours before we start actually messing with it. Okay, so the next thing we wanna do is die cut our bears, the scars, and the North Pole sentiment, and the candy cane striped pole that it's on. So I've got just a few colors here. These are all Spellbinders cardstock. We've got the alabaster that we're going to be cutting our bears out of. We've got the pomegranate, which is what we're going to be cutting out the scarves and the sentiment, as well as the pole. And then we've got Portobello. Now I don't know if this one is a current color, so I would just use something of a light craft color for that. All right, so I want to be very efficient, so I'm gonna lay out all of my dies all at once, and then we will run it through the die cut machine, and I'll do that off screen. All right, so in our little bear set, the North Pole friends, let me just pull this out. We are going to use this guy right here. And then we want this little guy right here. Now he has a little foot that we need to cut out, and that is going to be this guy right there, the little tiny one. So we're going to cut him out with that. We'll have some extra paws if we want to. And then we need the back of the paw, so it shows through the little pad of his foot. And that particular die is this one right here that coordinates with the one that's got the little holes in it. So that one's going to go on the brown color. And then for the sweater and the scarf, we're going to use this one for the little bear. And then we've got the scarf right here for the bigger bear. And we don't need anything. Oh, I almost forgot. We do need the second pair of legs for the bigger bear. So let's go ahead and put this away so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to go ahead and tape everything down. Now, that's for the bears. Now let's get out the dies for the sign. And we have, this is going to be cut out with white. So let me find some white cardstock. All right, so the pole itself is white, and then the candy cane stripe, which is this die right here, this one's going to be red. So I'm going to place that there. Let's go ahead and tape these down before I move them all around. All right, and in order to save myself some time, I'm just going to cut these down, and we're going to run it through the die cut machine all at once. I have the Spellbinders Platinum version, the bigger one, and so I'm just going to save some room on that die cutting machine and put all of these down at once and cut them all out at once. And then we've got extra cardstock for all of the other pieces when we want to do multiples of them. All right, so we're gonna make our sandwich here. I'm just gonna place all of these down and make sure we've got our sandwich here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and die cut these off screen. Now, one thing I did forget is to cut out the sentiment and the border that goes behind it, but we can do that in just a second. So you have to be really careful when you're lifting this up because these little pieces can get lost. So I like to use a little plastic container there just to keep all my little bits and pieces. Now, that one popped out right away, so I'm glad that I kept my cutting plates all together. As I was pulling it up, it kind of flew, so you just have to be careful. You don't want to lose that little bitty piece. All right, then the rest of them are pretty standard here. Just going to release all of our paper and put those in the little container there. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my pokey tool to poke this one out. Now we only need that little one, but we've got two other ones if we ever want to use them for the other bear that's standing up on its hind legs, or not really standing, but sitting on its butt. All right, so I've got the little one, and I'm gonna put that in there. And then we're gonna put the white sign pole. And then our red candy cane stripe. And then our scarves. Now, the little bear has these little ruffles for their sweater that you can use. You can use them as it is. You can die cut them with different colors. I'm only going to use the main piece. I'm not going to fiddle with these little tiny pieces. But I am going to use both of those. All right, now let's go ahead and let's cut out our North Pole. And we are going to do the North Pole one. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. You can die cut this out, and it's just going to cut out the words, North Pole. And then you can come back and center it, and then cut out the cutout, the edges of the sign. Or you can do it all at one time, which is what I'm going to try to do right here, just to save me just a little bit of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this die over, and then I'm going to place this die. Let's go ahead and turn it this way. I'm going to get a piece of tape out ready, because you definitely want this not to move. So what I'm going to do is try to make it centered inside that piece there. I'm going to put my finger down, try to hold both pieces at the same time, and then go ahead and tape it down. Now, just for example, I'm going to die cut another word just so you can see what it looks like when you are just die cutting the actual sentiment itself. All right, so if we turn this over, you're going to see what took place. So on this one where we kind of put them nestled together, the sign is already cut out, okay? But on the sentiment one that we didn't put a border around it, it's just going to cut out the word. Now, depending on what you're doing, you might want to do that. But for what I'm doing, we want to make sure that the sign is cut out. Now, what I need is a backing for that. And so I'm going to use the same die that I used to cut around my North Pole sign, and I'm going to cut that out with white so that the white shows through the little sign. All right, so I've just got some scrap here. I'm just going to tape that down and then run that through the die cut machine. All right, now we have a solid piece that will fit perfectly behind our little sentiment, our little sign, and we can go ahead and glue that. Now, before we do that though, we've got to poke out our little letters here. I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to use some liquid glue, just dab a little bit of glue, use my scissors to pick it up, or not my scissors, my tweezers, and then I'm just going to layer those together and make sure they're nice and even. Do a nice little squeeze there, and then the sign is ready. All right, now let's go ahead and assemble our little pole here. I'm going to turn over the red candy cane stripe, put some glue on that, and then I'm just going to line that up. Now we're only going to use the top part of that pole, so I'm not too terribly concerned about this bottom part. I'll just go ahead and trim that off now so it doesn't bug me, okay? All right, so we've got our sign and our pole done. So now for our bears, we want to do a little bit of sanding, and I'm going to be pulling out the cashmere ink from Catherine Pooler, and I'm going to be doing just some little light blending here. I'm going to go ahead and put some ink on the glass table so I can pick it up from there, and then I'm just going to do light ink blending just to give it some dimension, maybe some shadows. All right, now I want to do a little bit more of a detail shading here where the legs are and the underside. So I'm going to pull out a detail blending brush, and I'm just going to get into where that little line is. And right there, just to show where there might be some shadows from the legs, and then just do a little bit on the underbelly here. So just to kind of show you a little bit up close where we're at. All right, now let's go ahead and do the legs, the second pair of legs for our bear, which is this one right here. And this is going to go underneath our bear, about right there. So I really want to show some shadows right underneath there and just give it some dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and do my overall blending for now. I'm going to use my detailed here, and I'm going to just do some blending right there for where the shadow would hit the legs. So if I put this underneath, you can kind of see where that's going. So let me see if I can put this closer. Actually, let's go ahead and just zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Yeah, so you can see where the shadow is underneath his legs. All right, so he is pretty much done. I'm gonna do just a little bit more detail where these little cutouts are, make them a little bit more pronounced. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and glue his bottom legs in. So the next thing we want to do is give his cheek a little color. Now there is a die that you can use to die cut a different color and put that in there, but it's super teeny tiny. I really don't want to mess with it. So I'm going to be using a Copic marker. This is going to be R20, and I'm just going to color in that little spot right there. Okay. All right, and then we need to give him a scarf. Now, if I really wanted to, maybe would do some ink blending on the scarf, but in the end, I just decided not to. So the little edge, the little fringe edge needs to go on the bottom. So we're gonna put some glue on it, and then I'm gonna place it right here. Okay, and then the other part of the scarf is gonna go right on top. Like so. Okay, All right, now that bear is done. Let's do the next one. So I'm gonna need his body, I'm gonna need his sweater, and I'm going to need his foot. His foot is teeny tiny. All right, let's do the foot first. And we need to glue this Portobello craft color behind the little bitty bear die. So I'm just going to turn this over, put some glue down, and hopefully put this together. I'm just gonna lay it right there and give it just a little press. Hold it down for just a couple seconds. Okay, I'm just gonna kind of scoot it off to the side. All right, now let's go ahead and ink up our bear here, just like we did before. I'm gonna do a little bit extra on his bum, because that's probably where the shadow would be. All right, now let's do a little bit on our foot. Now our foot is gonna go right here, and there is a little indentation there where it kind of shows you where it needs to go. So I'm gonna put some glue on here. Oh, actually, before we do that, I made this mistake before. Let's leave that for a second. Let's glue his sweater down first. And his sweater is just gonna line up there with his leg and his body. Okay, let that dry for a second. And then his foot is gonna go right there. Hold him down for just a second and then let him dry on his own. Now here are our two bears. Aren't they just cute? Oop, we need to do a little bit of a cheek on this guy. Perfect. All right, so the next thing we need to do is to die cut our snowbanks. So in order to do that, we are gonna cut down some Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I'm just gonna get out my paper trimmer and trim this down. Now, this is an A2 size card. This is 5.5. I'm actually gonna cut my sheet down to just a little bit more than 5.5, so I have some wiggle room as to where that die is going to be placed on the card front. So I'm just gonna put this in my paper trimmer, and I'm gonna probably, let's do about 6 inches. That way I've got some wiggle room. All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and cut this down to 4 1/4. So essentially it is an A2 size this way, but it is a little bit longer this way. And then I'm gonna cut this down in half, and that is going to be about 2 1/8. I think that's right. All right, so now I've got these 2 sheets of paper here. Now we are going to be using the color block Scenic Scape, and I'm going to be using the 2 longer dies. We're going to leave the shorter one in the package. We're not going to be using that one. What I want to do is to place this die as close to the edge of the cardstock as possible, leaving space on both sides. Now, once I get this die cut out, I can actually continue the slope with my scissors, and that's going to give me a little extra room to maneuver on my cardstock. So I'm just going to go ahead and tape it down. And you have a little wiggle room as to how you want the slope of the die. And I'm just gonna look at my example here and just kind of figure out where I want that. I think that looks good right there. Then we're gonna do the same with the other. And this one is that front slope here. And I'm just going to place it about right there. Now, obviously, you can put it in any position that you want and kind of play with it beforehand just to see what kind of slope you want on your actual card. I'm gonna go ahead and die cut these off camera. All right, so let's go ahead and release our dies from the paper. All right, so we have those 2, and it's basically just cut out a piece in the middle of the paper, but I'm gonna use my scissors to sort of extend it. All right, now we have our 2 slopes here. Now let's figure out where we want to place on the card. So I'm kind of looking at my example, and you can do this lots of different ways. You can also turn them upside down, or from the front to the back, and use it this way if you want. So I'm just gonna spend a few moments here, and I'm just gonna play with my design here and see what I like. And I think that looks pretty good right here. We'll need to trim off the edges and the bottom, but what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to do some ink blending. Now on our original here, we've got a little bit of blue shading on the top of the slopes. This is just to kind of give the snow some dimension and also kind of mimic the northern lights being reflected onto the snow. So I'm going to use my distress ink. We're gonna use tumbled glass, and I'm gonna use just a basic blending brush. put some ink onto the surface, and I'm going to go in with a very light hand. I just want to do kind of a minimal ink blending on the top, not too heavy. You can always add more color if you like. You cannot take it away. Okay, one is done. Let's go ahead and do the second one. All right, so that is the front one, I believe, and that one is the back one. Let's go ahead and just clean our surface off real quick. All right, so we're gonna pretend this is our background so that we can place our snow drifts in the place that we want them, and then we can glue them together. I'm liking that right there. Just like that. That looks really good. All right, so I'm just gonna turn this over, put some glue down, and let's go ahead and move this out of the way. And we're gonna place that down just like that. Now we have our snowbank assembled. When we go to put it on the actual background, that's when we're going to trim it off. But right now it is good to go, and we can just put that to the side. All right, now it is time to finish our background for the Northern Lights. And full disclosure, I made the entire card and realized after I had viewed the footage that I totally did not have the right camera on, so I had to remake our panel. So the panel that I tried to reconstruct was the striped one, so that's the one we're going to be working with today. I'm not going to show you all of the different panels as I constructed them because, again, I recorded it and didn't have the right camera on, but let's go through and let's finish up the background as it is. All right, what we want to do is to create a vignette of dark blue color around the edges. We don't need to worry about here on the bottom because the snow banks are going to be covering that up. So I'm just going to ink blend around the edges. I'm going to do really dark on the outside and kind of light as we go in. And then when I'm done, I'm going to do just a light wash over the existing colors. All right, so now I'm going to kind of round off the edges here, making it a little bit more of a vignette look. And then I'm going to lightly go over the entire thing with just some color. And I'm not going to go heavy-handed. I'm going to do kind of light and dark, just making little spots so it doesn't look so, with all the lines. All right, I think that is looking pretty good. Now it is time for us to do our ink splatter. All right, so let's bring back our splatter box. I'm gonna place my card backing or card panel there, and then I am going to actually lay down some white acrylic paint. And this is the titanium white. You can use whatever white paint you want. Just make sure that it is acrylic so it will come through opaque and not see-through. They come in much smaller containers than this. You don't have to get this big, but I do a lot of acrylic painting, so I have a larger container. All right, now I'm not going to add any water to it, but if it is a little thick for you, then you can add a little water. Just want to make sure that you don't add too much water because then it becomes a little bit more transparent and not as vivid. So I'm just going to go ahead and spritz some white splatter. And I'm trying to vary the splotches so I can get some big splotches and some little ones. I'm going to go ahead and turn it so I get different angles of splatters. And you just add as much or as little as you like. And I think that looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to set that to dry for just a second. And I'm going to go ahead and wash this so that it doesn't dry with the paint on it, and then go ahead and clean this mess up right here. All right, let's try to get that to dry a little bit faster. I'm going to use my heat gun. Now some of those bigger splatters are a little wet, and normally I would just let this dry on its own, but because of the sake of time and for this tutorial, I'm going to bring out my heat gun and kind of point some more heat directly onto those spots, see if I can get them dry a little bit quicker. That looks really good. All right, so let's go ahead and take our snowbank here and kind of figure out where we want that. Now, don't forget, we've got to use our little candy cane right here and the little sign. So I want to make sure that I've got this in a position where it is not going to be crossing over. So I'm just going to place that like right there just to see how that looks. And we're going to place that there. We want to move it over just a tad. Let's move this down just a little bit. And then we can go ahead and put our bears just to give us some placement here. That looks pretty good. All right, now here is the tricky part. I'm going to pull that up, and I just want to put my finger right where the edge of that cane is, and I'm going to put the glue down on that pole so then I can place it back in the same spot. So it's just going to go right there. Okay, go ahead and get that placed down. Then we're going to check our placement again just to make sure. That looks really good. All right, so now let's go ahead and glue our bank down. I'm just gonna make sure I get it all lined up. That looks really good right there. I'm gonna turn it over, just give it a good press, make sure that it adheres pretty well. This is a lot of cardstock and I don't want it falling apart. All right, now I've got a lot of extra material here and I want to trim it off with my scissors, but I cannot get a straight image for my life. So I'm just gonna trim off some of the excess. And then I'm gonna use a paper trimmer for the rest. Let me go ahead and put my bear and my sign up so I don't lose them. And let's bring in my heavy duty paper trimmer. All right, so this is my Carl paper trimmer. It's a rotary trimmer and it can cut many layers at once, which is why I like it for this application. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over. I've got one side that is flat already, so I'm gonna use that side to line it up. And then I'm going to just line up the extra over, and then I'm gonna use the trimmer to cut that off. And it looks like I just need to move it over just slightly more. And now with that cut straight, we can use that as a straight edge and we can trim off the rest of that snowbank. And then turn it one more time and we can get that edge. Perfect. Now we have our card front. Now all we need to do is to finish assembling the card. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on a card base just to make it easier for myself. I'm going to use some of my alabaster cardstock that I used for the bear just to kind of tie that color in. I'm going to use a paper trimmer, or excuse me, a scoreboard to score down the middle. And it'll make it easier for me to fold it. Always want to turn it over where the bump is. Then I'm going to line up the corners, press all the way down in the middle, and then go out from the middle. Just a little pro tip on how to score and fold your card bases so you make an even fold each time. All right, now let's go ahead and check to see if we got great alignment as far as the card goes, and it looks like we are pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and place some glue down on the back. I wanna make sure I get plenty of glue on this because this card is rather heavy and we don't want it falling off of the card base. Now because this lines up perfectly, I'm just going to kind of use my table and my fingers as a guide. I'm going just to give it a nice little press. All right, now all we need to do is finish the card. So I'm going to place my bear right there. I'm going to place my sign right there. And then we've got our little bear. He is going to go right there. I'm going to turn him up just slightly like he's walking up the hill, just like that. All right, let's go ahead and put the sign on. Let's put some glue right here. I'm going to place that sign right there. I'm gonna hold it down just for a second. Okay, now let's go ahead and glue our bigger bear on. Okay, and the little bear. All right, now this next step is not necessary, but I kind of like to do it. So as you can see in my original, I've got a little bit of shading underneath where the bears are, and I do this with a Copic marker. I'm using the C1, the cool gray, and I'm just gonna squiggle a little bit of shadow underneath where he is standing. And right underneath where the bear is sitting. And there you have it. Isn't that cute? I love how the background came out and all of the little critters came together. What kind of card are you gonna make with this?